Yours just touched on such a great point there, right? Like striving for perfection.
Well, and if you're always living in the space of not good enough, what you're doing is missing the opportunity to celebrate the really big accomplishments and milestones along the way. And I think that's something that I've learned definitely as a leader, that if you wait until the ultimate delivery, if you wait until the ultimate goal is achieved, you'll never celebrate because you're always moving that goalpost.
And so it's like, it's getting that balance right. Like, you're good enough now, but sure, you can get better. And it's very nuanced.
And I think there's a unique responsibility that people in our age bracket have, because we learned to work from the older generation that did not experience this same pace of change. And we are leading the newer generation that only knows this.
I think it's terribly important to insist on individual values.
Learning Culture Podcast.
Initiative, creation, all these things which we value. It's now possible to make organizations on a larger scale than was ever possible before.
Learning Culture Podcast.
Teach people to analyze the kind of things that are said to them.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Learning Culture Podcast. I am your host, Andrew Barry, and this is a show about creating cultures of learning inside companies. Joining me for this week's episode is Jennifer Butler. Jennifer is the Leadership Development Director at Elevance Health, and I would say a geek after my own heart in terms of what really true transformational leadership development means. So this was a really fun episode to go into answering that question. And some of the things that you will learn from listening to my conversation with Jennifer is some of the capabilities that we think are most important right now for leaders. Things like the downside to striving for perfection and what to do about that, how to balance perfection with vulnerability, future orientation, and how to balance that with agility. So having kind of a healthy balance of those two. We also talk about a generational bridge that our generation plays between an older generation that didn't have to deal with the pace of change as much as we are dealing with, and a younger generation that is growing up in that and will probably deal with a lot more. We also unpack why we learn best when we flail as leaders. We also talk about the lie of expertise and how you don't always have to be a domain expert to be able to add value to a conversation. And finally, we discuss what it means to create transformational learning experiences and draw on some of the lessons and things that Jennifer has seen work well and not so well. And there's a lot of practical advice throughout this episode. So I encourage you to take notes while you sit back, relax, and enjoy my conversation with Jennifer Butler. Jennifer, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I have been looking forward to this conversation. We've had a few ourselves. For those listening, you may have noticed in recent episodes, I always start with a kind of out there question. And in this particular case, I actually shared it with you ahead of time. And I'm going to kind of explain why afterwards. But I'd love to start things off by asking you about Alanis Morissette. And which Alanis Morissette song comes to mind? And do you think about and has taught you about leadership?
Yes. So I'm glad to be here. And I'm glad that you told them we had already talked about this, because I feel like that could really come out of left field for a lot of people. So the song, and this recently hit me. So I graduated high school in 1996. That was the heyday of Alanis Morissette. Recently, my daughter and I were in the car driving to see my mom, and I played the album for her. She's 7, figured it was time for her to learn the classics. And listening to her song Perfect hit me in a totally different way. The lyrics in that song, I think there's a lot of people, and especially a lot of women my age, that connect with. The lyrics are talking about this striving for perfection and this doing everything perfectly to gain love, admiration, respect. And I didn't, let's be really clear, I didn't grow up in one of those uber competitive, you must succeed at all costs households.
Yeah.
But when I was listening to those words and listening to them with my daughter and thinking of the images and the messaging that we received at that time, it made me start thinking then truly about what I've learned now as a leader, which comes to the value of stopping sometimes, pausing,
Mm. Yeah. Yeah.
the value of allowing yourself to be vulnerable and be seen as vulnerable,
Mm.
and to put expectations out there that should be lofty and they should be big. We should all be aspiring for something, but it needs to be within reality.
Mm.
And I don't know that that's necessarily the messaging we all heard in 1994,
Yeah.
1995, et cetera.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. What a great answer. I let me. Yeah. The reason I said this ahead of time because I'm an Alanis fan as well, and I felt like I would have wanted the chance to think about it and not think and like have some dumb answer come to mind. And you clearly thought about it, and
yeah.
that's why I shared it with you ahead of time. You also just touched on such a great point there, right? Like striving for perfection. I have been thinking about this a lot recently as well in the context of my son
Mm.
and how like I talk to myself like that, and so start to see it come out and talking to him, and what it does. Unfortunately, there's a good side to this as well. Like ambition and striving and stuff. These are not necessarily bad things in and of themselves, but the flip side of it is also you're not good enough,
Yeah.
right? Like and so it's like it's getting that balance right. Like you're good enough now, but sure you can get better, and it's very nuanced.
Well, and if you're always living in the space of not good enough, what you're doing is missing the opportunity to celebrate the
Yeah,
really big accomplishments and milestones along the way. And
yeah,
I think that's something that I've learned definitely as a leader, that if you wait until the ultimate delivery, if you wait until the ultimate goal is achieved, you'll never celebrate because you're
mm,
always moving that goalpost. You should always
yeah,
be moving it up and forward.
yeah,
I think for me also, I credit some of this to the education and the exposure I've had to DEI initiatives over the last 20 years,
mm,
that it clicked for me probably 10 years ago that if if I'm going to expect other people to be empowered to show up as their authentic selves, I have to show up as my authentic self.
mm,
And part of that was dropping some of the baggage of
yeah,
perfection, or at least the
hmm,
appearance of perfection.
yeah. And why is that so difficult for leaders, right? Like I'm thinking of especially leaders. Kind of, I think of a younger version of myself as well, coming up through the ranks, right? Like
Hmm.
you're moving up because you are
Yeah.
approaching perfection in some
Hmm.
things, right? And you're doing a great job. You're producing great individual contributor work. Like, well, why
Hmm.
is it so hard to let go of that?
Because that's what's rewarded. Our experiences create our beliefs, right? And so to your point,
Mm,
you're moving up because of that appearance of perfection, or that getting close to perfection. So the first time you score the winning goal on your high school soccer team and you get to
mm,
start the next game, that imprints in your brain.
mm-hmm.
The first time the result or the outcome is praised in abundance as compared to the effort, that imprints
Yes.
on us, and that just repeats as leaders.
Mm,
So how many times do we in a job interview ask other leaders to tell us about a failure? We don't
mm,
do that very often.
yeah.
And that's the kind of stuff we need to talk about. You're going to learn, ultimately you learn more by at least flailing
Mm.
than I think you do by everything being perfect all the time.
Succeeding. Yeah, I
Yeah.
completely agree. Yeah, yeah, and it's interesting. It's it there's almost like this collective like mirage that we want to all create. That like, hey, no, we no one messes up around here, right? So we can't
Yes.
like pierce the veil of this like fake thing that we've created.
Right.
And yet the very power of authentic leadership is behind that,
Yeah.
and we have to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And look, it happens. I think we can all, give everybody listening 30 seconds to pause, and they can list in their head 3 people that they've
Mm,
seen get wildly accelerated in their careers because of inauthentic behavior.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's not fun. But at the
Mm,
end of the day, that's them. That's their life.
mm,
I still need to go to bed at night knowing that I showed up as me and that I accomplished what I accomplished, being true to myself. And
mm.
that's been very liberating in the last 4 or 5 years for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, awesome. So that's a great scene setter for the rest of our conversation.
Good.
You do leadership development, as do
Yes.
I. We're going to get to geek out on that as a topic.
Yes.
And I want to start with some of the sort of key attributes, capabilities, and skills you're focusing on,
Mhm,
and see as really important in the industry. And I
mhm,
think you called out one now about authentic leadership, right?
mhm,
Like when you and I spoke leading up to this a few times, we've talked about some other characteristics, and one of them, or two of them, I guess, that I really wanted to zero in on is future orientation and agility. And you've raised
mhm,
that to me a few times about how important that is. We want, and I see this as well in every client we work with, and in my own team, actually.
mhm,
Like you want people to be thinking about the impact of things on the future, like that long-term thinking idea, and then that agility, that ability to adapt, like,
mhm,
and it's that letting go of perfection. Like it's not, things that have worked in the past are not going to work in the future.
mhm,
You need to be agile and nimble. um, let's start there, very high
mhm,
level. Why are those particular uh, capabilities important?
mhm. Well, first, I see those two things as being in ultimate partnership with one another. I think if you have a mindset that is only future oriented, I think that's sometimes how you do get it and create this a culture of perfection.
Yeah.
And if you have a mindset that's only focused on your understanding of agility, then I think you start to maybe be a chaos agent. And so when those
Mm,
two work together, I think there's great application at both the individual leadership level, but also that cumulative organizational leadership piece. Um, Things just, at the end of the day, they move faster now than the previous generation of professionals in our same
mm,
spot did. And you've got to be able to move with it. I mean, that's
yeah.
probably something we're all getting sick of hearing.
Yeah, but it's
I
it's sort of. I just wanted to say, like, it's something that, yeah, it sounds like a well-worn cliche, but the thing is, it's true because it's always true. It's always more true, basically.
Yes. And I think
Yeah.
there's a unique responsibility that people in our age bracket have because we learned to work from
Mm,
the older generation that did not experience
mm,
the same pace of change, and
mm-hmm.
we are leading the newer generation that only knows this.
Yeah.
And so we've got this interesting bridge. There
Yeah.
is a 2015 article from McKinsey, and I think it's called Agility Rhymes with Stability. And what
Mm-hmm.
they highlight within agility are three things: speed, stability, and flexibility.
Mm,
And to me, it's the ultimate set of levers that we have to pull. There are times where we are going to have to focus on speed. And as a leader, that is going to be your priority. But that doesn't mean that you do it in a way that throws all the stability out the window or that you get
mm,
rigid. And, you've got to have those three things very equal and
mm.
balanced out over time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, that to
Yeah.
me, those all go together. And you see it when leaders can't focus on the future. That's when you hear the way we do it is, or how we've
Mm,
always done it, or they give you
yeah.
the list of 10 reasons why that new idea is going to fail, even though none of the criteria of why it failed in the past exists today.
Mm, mm, mm.
And when leaders are only focused on let's blow it up, let's start over, let's do that chaos definition of agility, nobody
Yeah.
wants to follow them. That doesn't feel safe. You've got to have
Yeah.
those two together.
Yeah. There's a great analogy for this. I love that you broke out that agility, so speed, stability, flexibility,
Mhm,
especially those first two. The concept of racing car, like Formula One cars,
mhm,
like they're these incredible machines basically designed to be stable at extremely high speeds.
mhm,
right? And so it's that, like, they are like, the faster they go, the more stable they are, and that's what makes those machines so good.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so it's something, there's something fascinating in that. Like, I always try, I think of leadership development somewhat as an alchemy, like an
Mm-hmm.
alchemist thing, right? Like, how
Mm-hmm.
do we kind of generate
Mm-hmm.
like, give people aha moments to then experience and connect with these ideas themselves,
Mm-hmm.
right? So what does speed, stability, flexibility mean for me in my work, like
Yes.
basically engineering? Yeah, curious actually, on that. Do you think similarly about how to sort of, like, the magic potion
Oh,
approach?
totally. And it's funny. So something I do a lot in my coaching is when someone else is sharing their experience, I share with them the mental image that it's conjured for me. So while you were
Yeah,
just talking about Formula One racing, I flashed back to learning how to drive my first manual transmission. And
yeah,
if you remember that moment where the gas and clutch perfectly engage,
yeah,
and so
completely.
that's what I think about with leadership, and that's what I think our
Mm,
job is as we're helping develop other leaders, is to create gas and clutch experiences
mm,
and moments for
mm,
them.
mm.
And hopefully, gosh, now that I think about it, like, I feel like manual transmissions are becoming a lesser known thing. I might have to get a fleet of VW bugs to be everybody's learning lab.
I I tell you, growing up in South Africa, that was all we knew, strangely enough. And it's like, coming here, that's the
Oh yeah.
default, is definitely not that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
No. So let's go back to that. Those break and clutch aha moments. I
Uh-huh.
like that. That's the key, right? If you can expose people to a lot of those,
Mhm.
and actually, in that example, it's perfect. It sort of goes back to something you are familiar with from
Yep.
your childhood, from growing up. So, and you made that connection. I shared a story about cars, and then you went there,
Mhm.
and that was great. It got you thinking about it. How have you seen that work well in leadership development settings? Do you have any
Yeah.
examples?
So I think, and what I'm about to say in no way is meant to discredit formal education or the value of formal education. But as I mentioned, I've said for years, adults learn by flailing. And so
Mm-hmm.
when we can give real world opportunities to flail in a
Yeah.
controlled fail safe setting, I think that's our practitioner gas and clutch moment. That's when
Mm.
we can feel the acceleration and we provide the value for the organization. And look, I think we do that through case studies and we do that through taking real projects from the business, and those are all great.
Mm-hmm.
But where I've seen success and where I think you can really accelerate things is when we take leaders out of their
Yeah.
company, their role, um, and we give them an opportunity to, I'll leverage a thought from multipliers. We give them an opportunity to let others borrow their brains.
Mm. Mm. Wait, say more about that.
So in multipliers, Liz Wiseman and her team they talk a lot about the best leaders don't come in and know everything. They borrow the brains of those who are around them.
Yeah.
And so what I've found great success is when I've participated in this as a participant, but also led experiences like this, is when we allow leaders to be the ones kind of on loan, or the leaders that are getting borrowed either by an external outside
Mm.
organization or even an internal, let's pull together 20 people from all across the company and solve this HR problem, but let's do it with people who work in actuary that don't know anything
Yeah.
about that basic HR theory. That to
Yeah.
me is where we really get some forward momentum.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Yeah, we leverage a lot of the voice of leadership at a company to provide context, provide examples, share best practices, and then in the moments in sessions, you have that happening in breakout rooms and
Hmm.
that kind of thing. Like, let's go into that a little bit more, because this is just it's just a great practical tactic, I guess, people
Hmm.
can use in their programs. What have been some of the success stories you've had on that? Like, and what are some of the challenges as well in
Hmm.
bringing a leadership voice to the program?
Hmm. So The first success story or the first example I'll share is something where I was able to do it as a participant. And this was 100% plucked out of my comfort zone. That with a previous employer, I was able to travel with a cohort of individuals from across the world. And we spent a week in Tanzania working with local leaders
Mm,
and medical clinicians, nurses, and our goal was to help strengthen cervical cancer screening and prevention.
mm-hmm,
I am not a doctor. I am not a cervical cancer expert.
yeah.
What I am is I like to think somebody that can ask good questions, somebody that can bring different ideas or think about things differently. And what we saw, and I was one of, I think, 10 cohorts that did this over a series of years. What we saw was ultimately there were additional clinics built. There were supply chain improvements made. There was an increase of screening and prevention and vaccines given that has
Mm,
real world impact on those people's lives. And you had leaders going back and saying, I think I better understand how to ask powerful questions. I
mm,
think I understand how I might want to take a pause and wait for things to come to me a little bit, or I
mm,
probably need to articulate the why better. And so it was this balance of, at the end of the day, the company didn't make more money. We didn't sell the vaccines,
mm.
but we had leaders that came back and drove initiatives better and were able to move projects
Yeah,
forward. And that to me is that perfect way that gets somebody out of their day to day and give them an
yeah.
opportunity to grow and stretch and bring it back.
Mm. Wow, that's actually really cool. I'm wondering now to out loud, I guess, what role location plays in this. Like actually like taking people out of the setting that they're most familiar with, putting them out of their comfort zone a little bit.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, so let's be clear. Having lived in the United States my whole life, a flight to Tanzania was very much out of the
How do
comfort
you?
zone.
Yeah.
I was super excited for the adventure, but it was very different. I don't think it
Mm,
always has to be that dramatic. So, what I've
yeah.
also seen is, like I said, ask the HR people to weigh in on the actuary project or vice versa, or
Mm,
even partnering your organization with other organizations, maybe smaller groups in your local area, maybe nonprofit groups, and
mm,
creating an exchange of ideas and thoughts. I think there's
mm,
lots of ways, and there's some ways that we're doing that now where we do make those partnerships, um, and
yeah.
and let people loan out their leadership. And if you think
Yeah.
about it, we all do that. If you sit on a PTO, for your kid's school, you do that. If you try to
Yeah.
sit on a board of a local organization, you're doing that to some
Yeah.
extent anyway.
Yeah. 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 I feel like as well, what is a powerful way of doing this is bringing in an expert speaker, a presenter that has a story, right?
Hmm.
That's sort of like transporting you, and that's good at telling that story as well, right? That's transporting you into that world of theirs.
Hmm.
So like the last one I heard of, I wasn't involved in this, but was a client of ours that did an offsite in Portugal, and they had a female pilot from the Royal Air Force
Yeah.
come and speak to them, right? And it's
Yeah.
just like, no one in that room knew anything about what it's like to be a pilot in the Royal Air Force, right?
Right.
And so as a female pilot as well, another unique level of that experience. And so just sit and hear that is incredibly powerful,
Hmm. Hmm.
and also transports you a little bit out of that familiar way of thinking.
And I think,
But wait, yeah, you go ahead.
sorry to cut you off, but I think
Yeah.
it's that idea of transporting. Let me
Yes.
turn off the expense reports I have to approve or the spreadsheet I need to
Yes.
finish. Let me turn that off and get away from that. Um, and make it clear that there's value in learning to learn differently. I think that's
Mm,
something you can't just pluck somebody out of their desk and drop them into that unknown. You've got to level set a little bit of, here's why and here's what this is going to look
yeah.
like. Because I saw people on the Tanzania trip
Mm,
not make the dropping as
yeah.
successfully,
Yeah.
right? Or
Yeah. Yeah.
not, they maybe weren't willing to drop their Western
Yeah.
paradigms or perspectives.
Yeah.
And so it's not easy for everyone.
Yeah. Yeah, and let's talk about, so there's a downside as well to doing this. Like, people listening may have seen this, where you go to Tanzania, or you bring in a great speaker like
Mhm.
a Brené Brown, whatever, and it's like amazing, right? The Tanzanian experience, Brené, obviously incredible, but then like nothing actually changes, nothing
Yes.
happens, right?
Yeah.
How have you seen, so the importance of real world application for that? How do
Yes.
you approach that to make sure you're actually getting that not you, that participants are getting value from that?
Yes. So this is where you have to get really into the detail, and you kind of have to, as a practitioner, own the execution of some of that.
Mm,
I'll never forget, I facilitated a conversation. There were two, this was years and years and years ago, two functions within the company I was at the time were not getting along. And so I facilitated what was supposed to be a 2-hour conversation, and it ended up being 6 hours. And I
mm.
joked that at one point I needed a striped shirt and a whistle because I was a referee. I was stopping one group from talking and bringing another group in, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And at the end of the conversation, the senior most leader stops and looks at me and goes, "All right, so did we do it?" And I stopped. I said, "You had a conversation. Like, we haven't done anything. We've just talked." So, and I think that's one of those places where sometimes the
Yeah,
people in our seat want to wipe their hands and be like, "Okay, well, I did my event." No, we have to
yeah.
be the ones driving. How are we measuring this? And I don't just mean a smile sheet at the end of the session.
Mm-hmm.
How are we coming
Mm,
back in 3 months and asking what was sticky? What have you done? And making sure that that gets reported and gets
mm.
reported, even if that report is a story. Not everything is going to have dashboards and data, but
Right.
that one story where you can say, someone that went to this program or somebody that had this experience was actively looking for another job, and now they're not and they're
Mm,
staying here. Great. You have a
yeah,
retention data, a retention
yeah.
metric,
Yeah, totally.
right? It's
Yeah.
those things. And so we have to be collectors of stories. And on a leadership development or a learning and development practitioner side, we're not really good at that always. We want to
Yeah.
get the smile sheet that they liked it and that they left jazzed, and we don't follow up a lot as well with that
Mm,
later story. And those later
yeah.
stories are what get you invited back
Yeah. Yeah. It's
and
so, I mean,
tell your value.
yeah, I just love everything about this. You're dropping an insight after insight here, and I think that point is so key. And I think the reason, we do this obviously for our work. It's such an important part of it. And
Hmm.
what I know from experience is that that's the hard part,
Yes.
and that's the part that's why it's avoided so much, because it's
Yes.
what it means is often, at least in our experience, is lots and lots of conversations with people who went through the experience, and some of those don't go anywhere. Some, but it's like you've got to you're talking about story collecting. It's like story mining. You've got
Yes.
to like really dig for it, right?
Yes, we are using, or I use something. It's a modification of an interview process that
Mm-hmm.
we've kind of put together, but it's not as easy as show the QR code and report out in 2 days that
Yeah,
98% of people loved it. But
yeah.
when you pull out that story where someone says, "Here's the 3 points, here's what's better," or they say, "And
Mm,
now here's who's promoted," or
mm,
I've now found a way to save $1 million reoccurring over time, right?
yeah, yeah,
I
exactly.
think part of it is we as practitioners need to have the confidence to sell those stories
Mm,
just
mm.
like we did with the 98% smile sheet rating.
Yeah,
And we
exactly,
don't always do
exactly.
that. We don't always do that well.
Yeah. I wonder if it's because people think well, it's just a story, it's just a data point, in, and I need to give data, right? I need a lot more data and stuff. And
Yes.
I wonder if, like, I don't know, you're not saying this. You're not saying like, you're going to get one outlier story and then you're going to craft your entire thing around that. But the story's the hook. There's also data behind it, right? The
Yes.
story's the hook, though.
Yes. And look, the reason that we don't actively and deliberately beat down the door to get those stories is because we have been told by business leaders or other people of, well, that's just one story or that's just one
Hmm.
thing, right?
Exactly.
So I get how we've as a function gotten here,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
yes, you have to use that story and that hook to say, and now here's what the next cohort is going to get. or here's what
Mm,
this looks like. And you've got to balance it out with here's our retention data and here's how we're outpacing the org or whatever that is. I find sometimes that when we are able to show up with a story that sprinkles some data in there,
mm,
it often gets much better results than we thought
mm,
it would. We've just been
yeah.
conditioned to believe that nobody's going to listen.
Yeah. Yeah, I think as a segue into my next question, one of our personal favorite examples of that is someone in a breakout room who had that. Actually, we've saved it's like $200,000 a year or a month or something for one of their clients, and it was
Mhm.
because of some specific thing that someone in a breakout room said. So we could never have taught that in the program, right? It was
Yes.
something in a breakout room that just made sense for that person's client because of the experience of the other person and their client,
Yes.
but that story became a meme for what that program was doing
Yes.
across the
I
board.
I just had a conversation with someone who hadn't taken PTO, hadn't taken any vacation for at least 2 years. The story might have been longer than that. And through a cohort and through her peers, she left and made a plan to be gone. And
Mm,
she took some long weekends. She did these different things. And this was, I think, like April to July or June, she put this plan in place. And while she was gone, everything funneled through her chief of staff.
mm,
And the chief of staff was the only person that knew how to get a hold of her, like on the bat phone, if you will.
yeah, yeah,
And he never called. He didn't need to. So I
yeah,
look at it in terms of there's great value and benefit to her. She got to get away and recharge.
yeah,
Someone else got to try on that next level of leadership. That's
yeah,
huge. That's real life
yeah,
experience. And others on her team are now able to better role model and understand getting
mm,
away and
yeah,
moving things forward without that ultimate control point.
yeah.
So,
Yeah, so there are these like first, second, third order consequences and
yes.
effects to these kind of things. Let's talk a little bit more about that. One that you've mentioned to me before, and I think we've resonated on together, is this sort of like idea of you call it an internal consortium of
Mhm.
ideas.
Mhm.
Another big downstream benefit of this is that idea generation that happens across a company and across kind of a community of learners in a
Yeah.
company.
Yeah.
Can you say more about that?
Yeah, and I think this is something we don't do enough. If I think back to that my Tanzania experience, I had some serious imposter syndrome, right? There were medical leaders that knew the science of what we were talking about, and then there was me and my cohort.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, but we don't do it enough, and then we get stuck in our silos, and I think we start to believe the lie of expertise. And the
Yeah.
reality is that when you bring together those different experiences, those different levels of knowledge, and and position a clearly defined problem, you create opportunity for people to stretch in their role or in their place by diving into that unknown.
Mm,
Um, you create the opportunity for them to find what is their differentiating value. No, I do not know the molecular makeup of cervical cancer. I do,
yeah.
however, know 5 great questions that I could ask to move the conversation along, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And everyone looks a little different with that. And so when you pull
Yeah.
together that consortium and all of a sudden there's my 5 great questions and somebody else's 5 great questions, and we realize the partnership we can create, not only do we tackle that initial defined problem, oh, we've now created a partnership.
Yeah.
And I just did something like this where we pulled together some leaders to solve some defined problems, and that's been one of the biggest questions I've gotten afterwards. Hey, do you remember who was so and so that was on this project? Because I want to talk to them about. And these are
Yeah.
people that maybe on paper have worked together for years and are
Right.
now connected in a different way.
That's such a good point. Yeah, and it's a reoccurring piece of feedback from our work as well, that people are saying like we never have space for this.
Yeah,
And it's like it's so funny, right? Because like what's stopping you, at the end of the day? But
right,
like so there's but it does need some kind of impetus. It does need some kind of reason, because we
right.
all also get busy, and so
Yes.
we're stuck in our own thing. And so
I think the
yeah.
other thing that we can do as practitioners is when we structure those experiences, when we help leadership teams or groups go through a problem solving or a summit or whatever, we need
Mm,
to do it and deploy it in ways that are transferable. So it can't be so complicated and tech tech dependent, et cetera, that they can't turn
Yes.
around and do it with their team.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
and so I think those are the best ways to do it. When you introduce a XYZ template, to then
Mm.
at the end say, oh, by the way, take that to your next team meeting, have your team walk
Yeah.
through it. You can do
Yeah.
that. And again,
Yeah.
you talk second, third generation impacts. Well, what you've done is not only get them thinking differently, but you've equipped them with a new tool, a new thing
Mm.
to use.
Massive.
It's
Massive.
huge.
Yeah. So one last point on this before we move on is any other tactical ways other than you mentioned basically like leading by example to encourage people. So it's like actually it's going back to the idea of this lie of expertise. Like
Mm-hmm.
I can only provide value if I'm speaking from my domain and I'm in this
Mm-hmm.
foreign setting. So therefore, what value can I add? Like how do you, other than lead by example, create the space where people feel like they can lead into their authentic experience, even if it's not quote unquote expert experience?
Mm-hmm. So I think there's a few things we can do. And one of it is we have to create experiences that blow up those lines of expertise. So when we pull together an internal consortium, don't worry about the org chart. Don't worry about some so and so got invited, so their boss must get invited too. No.
Yeah.
Don't worry about that, some of those more traditional tools of learning. And don't get overly encumbered by the didactic. It's
Mm.
okay to write a question on the whiteboard and say, we'll be back in 20 minutes to see what you think. Or even
Mm.
better, what I've seen done before is write the question on the whiteboard and don't have a moderator, don't have a facilitator in the room. And so then when the individuals show up, they look around and they're like, I guess we're supposed to tackle that now.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Some of it is just, it's like, that mean uncle that taught you to swim just by throwing you in the deep end. We've got to
Mm.
do that in a place with leaders that I think
Yeah.
forces them to swim, but also forces them to look and go, oh, I know more about this and you know a little bit. And so together we're good.
Yeah.
But I mean that in a
So
controlled setting, not forever. You can't make that somebody's whole job where they feel
right.
like they're drowning, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's like, yeah, and that's the learning experience. You're meant to be slightly
Yeah.
out of your comfort zone.
Yeah.
Yeah. But so just one more thing, I guess, on you mentioned like there is that political baggage
Mm-hmm.
that can sometimes come into it. What do you say to, Karen in accounting or Kevin in data science who's like, I should be here if that person's here? Like, how do you deal with those kind of individuals?
My first takeaway from comments like that is then where are we lacking other opportunities? So if someone is saying, well, why didn't I get invited? That says to me they're missing something elsewhere. Why are we not giving them other
Hmm.
things to fill that space?
Oh, that's really
Right?
good.
So, oh, okay, yeah,
Mm.
you didn't get invited to this, but didn't you just attend? And if you can't rattle off, or if you as a talent practitioner can't connect to other things,
Mm.
then maybe that means there's not enough in your ecosystem.
Yeah.
And then if they're still disgruntled, then I think you flip it around and, well, why is inclusion in this so important?
Hmm.
And maybe there's norms, maybe there's a historical status indicated with attending a certain meeting or attending a certain thing that you're only going to break if you A, address it head on, but then B, show what the real intent was. That, oh, by the
Mm.
way, it's not just about attending. Once you attended, then you're doing this presentation or then you're on this project that it keeps living on.
Yeah.
And then it becomes less about, did I get the invite?
Yeah. And
Those are,
more about the experience of
yeah,
like I had that experience, and it's also sometimes just about making the implicit explicit to say like,
yeah.
hey, you are getting that, and here's
And
how
here,
it's showing up. Right.
or the other question sometimes is, did anybody know you were interested in that kind of
Yeah.
experience? And
Another
I
great
think
point.
that sometimes we sit back as individuals and we think somebody's just going to, understand what we want, even though we've never said, I'd love to get an opportunity to go to the sales summit, or I'd love to get
Mm.
to go to the accounting forum. Okay.
Mm.
If we don't tell
Mm.
anybody, maybe they don't know we want to go.
Mhm.
I think there's
Yeah,
levels.
which definitely, and I think it also goes back to then setting the example of, yeah, I guess like as a talent leader, what you can do is to be explicit about how you're learning and how others are learning, and sort of point that out so that it's like,
Yes.
hey, there are opportunities out there, and these are available to all of you, and here's
Yes.
how to seek them
Yep.
out.
I
Yeah.
worked with somebody years ago and they said, good development for all, great development for some. And that is the reality. We have differentiated offerings. Every
Mm,
company does. But as long
yeah.
as everyone's getting something good, you shouldn't have too much of the complaining.
Yeah. Oh, I wish we had more time because that might be for another follow up. That last point, good development for all, great development for some. I've had this, I think on the podcast as well, the question of scale, right? Like
Yeah.
how do you scale these things?
Yeah.
Um, but in the interest of, I want to make sure we talk about one more thing on this
Okay.
show. So just or in this conversation is the sum part, I guess, the sort of more like personalized
Mhm.
interventions that are really focused on transforming people.
Mhm.
And I want to set this. What I want to talk about here is kind of why we should care
Mhm.
about this. You know, why
Mhm.
should people listening care about doing these kind of experiences? And you and I have talked about, talent reviews and how the talent review process generates, kind of this mapping of people, and you've got like in a 9 box, you've got your top right hand corner of people, right? So your highest potential people, 10% or so of the company, you really, really want to keep these people. So, and you mentioned retention a few times as
Yeah.
being key.
Yeah.
Now, there's challenges. You can't promote all these people. You can't give them,
Right.
those monetary benefits right away. But you can, and luckily, and it does line up with what most people are seeking in jobs. You can give career growth
Mhm.
and development, right?
Mhm.
And so that's what a lot of companies do. But a lot of companies also miss the mark, and they
Mhm.
go back to like that feeling that what we talked about earlier, like bring in Brené Brown and bring in Adam Grant, and then
Right.
like, there's nothing else really that's like tying the thread. There's no real world application. There's no
Right.
community built around that. What have, in your experience, have been the benefits, the reasons people should care about
Mhm.
creating truly transformational experiences?
Mhm. So first, I mean, bravo to the companies that can afford and fund Brene Brown and Adam Grant and all of those.
Right.
Um, but let's be clear, those are just better financed versions of free cookies in the lounge. It's
Yes.
it's I mean it's a thing. It's a nice thing. And look,
Yeah.
so I I think that I'll talk to the practitioners at first because I'm sure there's lots of the talent audience listening.
Mm,
Focusing on a transformative experience is how talent development or leadership development earns our keep. This is
mm,
how we provide value to the business. Long
mm,
gone are the days where we can simply be an educational or didactic function. And I would argue those days didn't really exist outside of, specific functional push this button training anyway.
yeah.
Um,
Totally.
but the reality is, any skills or any knowledge you want to gain, I can gain in a 30-second Google search or 15 seconds if I go straight to the image page and just pull off, whatever QRG is up there.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
When we don't focus on transformative, and by transformative, I mean at the individual person level,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
helping them come out the other side changed in some way, then I don't know that we've got a good data point to pull to, or that we can make that story for
Yeah.
mobility or retention or whatever. We have to have the stories and create the experiences where someone says, I had no confidence until I had XYZ conversation, or
Mm,
I'm now showing up and demonstrating this courage, and here's what that looks like.
mm,
Um, and truly, I think that's how you impact some of those big metrics, is you make it so that someone never wants to leave an
mm.
organization
So
because they know the next month or the next year there's another big meaty challenge coming, Or the reverse. They know that maybe life is going to be crazy in 2 years, and the organization is going to let them add value where they're at and come back for the next challenge thing, right? Not we've got to find that balance. And I think as practitioners and talent development people, when we can create some of that in our programs or in our sessions, and we connect everything back to individual shifts, that's where we take money to the bank.
100%.
And
And that doesn't. No,
personally, it just feels better as a human.
Yeah.
For somebody to
exactly.
say, hey, I went to this class and now I'm a better coach for my kid's soccer team.
Yeah.
That's amazing for me to hear.
I love that you went there. That's exactly what I was going to say. We're not saying don't bring Brené Brown and Adam Grant in. Like, if you can afford that, amazing. But make sure you really get value out of that investment. Get people to do something differently.
Yes.
With those.
And I think, look, I've done a speaker series, and full disclosure, Adam Grant was a speaker at that. And that's great. And 90% of the people love it because they got access to those words.
Right.
But the 10% that used the discussion guide and brought the conversation back to their team and attended every speaker series, those are the people that really got the juice for the squeeze. And that's where you got to focus.
These are the lifelong learners, the first to sign up for the book club.
Right.
I love those people.
I've done that before too. At a certain point in the session, here's the QR code, and the first 250 people get a copy of the book when it comes out. And you can predict who those are going to be, and you can track those individuals across everything.
Yeah.
And we got to tap into that.
Yeah. Oh man, there's so much more we could talk about. That insatiable appetite for learning, I think, is another thing. But I want to wrap this up with one final question for this episode, at least. And that is, Jennifer, why do you do what you do?
I don't know that I know how to do anything else. I mean, that's a very honest, off the cuff question. I do what I do because, so at one point in high school, I thought I was going to be a teacher. And then I was sitting one day in my AP history class, and the class was being jerks. And I thought, oh my God, we're the smart, nice, good kids, and we're acting like this? Okay, I don't want to be a teacher. Check that off the list. And then I knew I wanted to do something in business. And ultimately, I think it comes down to, I love the seat I sit in that is this connection between helping the business be successful, but doing it for humans.
Yes.
And just yesterday, I went through and sent out shout outs to a past cohort. We've had a few people get promoted. That might be why I do what I do, is so that I get to send the message that says, congratulations on this promotion. Congratulations on this promotion. Yeah. And then the side message from somebody going, I didn't know you would know about that. I was like, I have all kinds of tricks. Come on. But that connection and making people feel noticed, that's huge.
Yeah.
That's huge.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Sort of being the Sherpa on that journey, right? Like, you're playing some small part in helping them, but they're doing all the work.
Yes. In some cases, that Sherpa looks like a Sherpa with a rucksack. In some cases, it looks like a cheerleader. In some cases, it just looks like somebody to talk to. Exactly. But that's huge. So
yeah, amazing. Beautiful answer. I've really enjoyed this conversation, Jennifer. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Hello. I hope you enjoyed that episode. It's Andrew again with a quick message. If you'd like to support the show, the best way to do that is to leave us ratings and reviews where you listened. If you're on YouTube, hit the like and subscribe buttons, and feel free to leave a comment. We love hearing from our listeners and viewers. If you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts, please take the time to give us a rating and leave a review. Once again, we love hearing from our loyal listeners. If you're listening to this on Spotify, please hit the follow button to make sure that you don't miss new episodes as they come out. See you next week for another episode of the Learning Culture Podcast. Thank you for listening.